Hey everybody, we're going to spend this video talking to you about the different types of fly rods. So if you're trying to get into the sport or you want to upgrade or learn a little bit more, stay tuned. We're going to tell you everything you need to know about different types of fly rods.
That's a big brown bro.
Okay, hey, I'm Curtis with Fly Fish Food, and today we're going to give you some information that we've had a lot of requests on, and it's one of those that seems to be maybe taken for granted because a lot of us here at Fly Fish Food have been fishing for a lot of years. And if you're part of our school community and this is where you're seeing this video, this is also part of our effort to educate everybody with as much free educational content as possible. Speaking of which, if you are familiar with our school, that's skool.com. Search us up, Fly Fish Food. We've got a whole wealth of free educational content to help you learn how to fly fish better and how to tie flies better. Check it out. It's pretty awesome. Anyway, so let's jump into it. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to work my way through a variety of different fly rods. And this is going to be important to you because as you're just getting out, there's going to be some instances where having a different type of fly rod for a different function could be the difference between you having a good experience or not. With that said, you certainly don't need every type of fly rod that we're going to talk about here, but I also think that we have a lot of people that come in the shop that are fairly limited to the fish species and the style of fishing that they do, only based on the fact that they've got this one fly rod and that's the one that is going to work for them through every condition and every type of fishing situation. So with that said, my point here is to tell you about and help you understand the different functional requirements or the different functional reasons you would have these different fly rods. So we're going to start with probably the most common one, and that is going to be the venerable 9-foot 5-weight. If you've been in fly fishing at all, you know that the 9-foot 5-weight is probably the most common fly rod out there. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what the weights mean, I'm not going to go into a huge diatribe about that, but suffice it to say, the smaller the weight number, the smaller the weight of the rod and its ability to throw smaller weight lines. So you typically, if you're dealing with a 2-weight, that's going to be small stream. If you have a 12-weight, that's probably big salmon, steelhead, well, giant, but more saltwater. So big species, potentially big flies, and maybe some heavier lines. So that is going to be consistent throughout regardless of the type of fishing that you're going to do. But functionally speaking, there are going to be different types of rods that you need to know about. So if you're just starting out, probably the 9-foot 5-weight is the way to go. This is a 9-foot 5-weight. This is a Lamson rod. A lot of you don't know that Lamson actually sells some really good rods for really good prices. One of the better value brands in the world. Now the 9-foot 5-weight is going to be just that Swiss Army knife. You can fish it on small streams if you want. You can fish it on rivers. You can fish it on lakes. It literally will handle most of what you're going to do outside of maybe a lot bigger fish or a lot bigger flies. That's where you start to kind of see more of a functional need to go with a heavier weight. But the 5-weight can do it all. This is most of the time is going to be the rod that people start with. And because of that, it's going to be the most common rod out there. And this, again, just to kind of give you an idea, would be just representative. It's got, as compared to some of the other rods we're going to get to, a grip that fits in your hand, and then a 5-weight rod, which is going to have, generally across brands, going to be very similar in size and weight, going from there. Now, everybody's got that one. So that one we're just going to kind of skip and move on to the next functional type of fly rod that you may or may not need. And in my case, over the years, one of the first things when I started to get out of my 9-foot 5-weight zone, probably the first thing I went to was a small stream rod. So back in the early 90s when I got probably would have been my 3rd or 4th rod, was a little 3-weight Sage rod. And in this case, when we deal with small stream or dry fly rods, what we've got here is a Winston Pier 2. This rod and most Winstons are designed to be just dry fly rods in general. They're lighter. They're going to have a speed that's not as peppy, so it's going to be a little bit more forgiving on the cast. And what does that mean for you functionally? Well, first off, if you did have a faster 9'5" weight, I'm not saying you can't go out on a small stream and catch plenty of fish. Half the time when I'm going after a different type of species or a different method of fishing, I like to use the tool that to me seems the best for that situation. And in that case, I would go in this one, which happens to be a nice little small dry fly rod. This is a 7'9" 4-weight. And they also come in 3 weights, and you can also get a lighter 5-weight dry fly rod if you wanted to. Again, those are going to be overall softer, lighter weights. They're going to be, the tips will be a little bit softer to protect hook sets on light tippet situations. They require you to slow down a little bit on your cast, which is kind of nice if you think you're in this nice mountain stream, or you can see yourself in this nice mountain stream setting. Not very long, big, gigantic casts. They're probably not giant fish, and you're probably not throwing giant flies, which means it's perfect for something very lightweight like this little dry fly Winston Pure 2. Now, there are lots of other, what I would call dry fly style rods. And again, you're not limited by this rod. You could certainly go and fish this rod on bigger waters. But for me, when it comes to just kind of maximizing what the function of the rod is for, that's where I'll start to look at some of these things like a dry fly specific rod. Now, it doesn't mean you can't fish streamers with it, or you can't, I wouldn't necessarily jump to that conclusion first, but they do have, you could do dry droppers, you could throw smaller streamers, but by and large, it's going to be my dry fly go-to. Now, after small stream or lightweight dry fly rods, the next thing that I'm going to look at from a functional standpoint is stillwater fishing. So stillwater fishing involves, more often than not, bigger fish, much longer casts, and some specialty lines that may weigh a lot more than your typical, say, dry fly floating line. And so because of that, we will typically want to move to a functionally different stillwater rod. And in this case, I've got a Scott Centric, and this is a 10-foot 6-weight. So what the extra foot of length there gives us is more leverage. So if you think of it just from a lever arm, your fly rod being a little longer from its fulcrum, it's going to have more line speed or more speed and force at the rod tip. It's going to be going faster because it's a longer lever arm. That's just physics. That also helps if you are on a boat or in a float tube or even from shore. If you are fishing these specialty lines, which we tend to do on most every stillwater trip I do, I go through at least 2 to 3 lines, maybe more, just depending on the conditions, because we're dealing with kind of a 3D body of water both ways, and it's a lot more difficult to tell where the fish are. So that extra foot's going to help us get the line off the water. It's going to give us more leverage to cast these bigger rigs. I'm also fishing longer leaders. So functionally speaking, I would say a 6-weight, 10-foot is going to be my go-to functional rod for stillwater. Now, again, I could go back and I'll say this all the whole video. You could do the same thing with the 5-weight. May not be as enjoyable. It may be a little tougher to cast. You aren't going to have as big a selection with the 5-weight on the lines that you do with the 6, because they tend to go kind of 6-7 is the core sizing for stillwater lines, whereas 5s and 8s are a little bit outside of that. You will find some, but not all. So again, specialty line or specialty rod, I think stillwater is a good reason functionally to move to a different rod. I'm not saying upgrade, because let's not fool ourselves. This is not an upgrade. This is an expansion of the arsenal. So, and of course, by budget, we would recommend you always be careful with how you spend your money. Therefore, most of the rods that we're talking about here do come in an economy version. Most of them happen to be kind of the upper echelon rod selections, but this concept remains the same. You could go to an Orvis Clearwater, which is a $300-ish rod, and it's a great dry fly rod. It's just not going to be as pricey as some of these upper end ones. Might be a little heavier and that sort of thing, but functionally it would work great. It is a 3-weight. Okay, so now let's move on to the next rod type, and that is going to be saltwater. Now, functionally speaking, yes, I could take my 5-weight out and fish it for tarpon off a boat in the flats of Mexico or Belize. Probably wouldn't want to do that because that 5 weight could potentially break. Certainly not going to huck the line types that you need to get there. So if you are going to go saltwater, I'd recommend going with either a saltwater rated rod, which this is a Sage R8 Salt. And when it says salt in the name, what that will typically mean for you, other than, it's going to be probably 8, 9, 10, 12 weight rod, but it also will have the components on the rod that will not be as conducive to corrosion in a saltwater environment. You absolutely 100% still need to wash down your equipment, even if it's rated for saltwater. But generally speaking, the saltwater components are going to be beefier, going to be more robust, and work functionally for a saltwater situation better than just any old rod. Now, it doesn't have to say salt on it to use it in the salt. In fact, most of the time I'm just grabbing my 8 weight or 10 weight or whatever it is, pursuant to the fish that I'm after, that will kind of scale to that. So if I'm after bonefish, I'm probably fishing a 7 or an 8 weight, mostly 8s. If I'm going for bigger permit and tarpon, we're going to be talking 9s and 10s. Pike, kind of the same thing. Maybe salmon and some steelhead, we're doing 7s and 8s as well. So functionally speaking, depending on the fish that you're chasing, you may need to expand your arsenal by virtue of going up weight, and that will usually cover the bases. Now, with that said, there are some other functional type of rods that have a little bit more specificity to that function. And we're going to talk, we'll end our video by talking about probably the 2 biggest ones that are very functional and very unique to how you fish them, how you cast them, and how you gonna rig your whole system with them. And that first one is going to be the Euro nymphing rod. So what we've got here, this happens to be a Sage ESN. We've got a lot of other brands out there. This is a 10-foot 3 weight. And the Euro nymphing rods, which we sell a lot of, Euro nymphing has really exploded in the last, say, 10 years. We do sell a lot of Euro nymphing rods. We use them a lot. And by and large, those rods are going to be a little softer on the tip because they need to load and unload with a smaller amount of weight, because the line itself is essentially a running line. It doesn't have like a giant mass like a weight forward floating line would on your 5 weight. Okay, so what happens in that scenario is you go to cast a 5 weight floating line, that mass of the line is going to go back and your rod's going to load, so to speak, so it's going to go under tension and then release as you begin your forward and finish your forward cast. With the Euro nymphing rod, it's not like that because it's expecting to be loaded by the weight of the flies almost alone. So what that means is that you can't just grab any old 3 weight 10 foot and call it good for Euro nymphing, because you have a different type of line, you have a different leader, and you have a different fly setup. So Euro nymphing rods are very specific, and we always recommend to people, which you can get budget rods with a Euro nymphing type rod, but don't fool yourself into thinking that you're going to adequately do the Euro nymphing technique with your 9-foot 5 weight. So probably that is, for our crowd of people that come to us, that's probably the biggest motivating factor to expand your arsenal, is that Euro nymphing technique is very limited if you are not using a Euro nymphing rod. Okay, now that said, the Euro nymphing rod can also be used for dry flies. It can be used for throwing streamers, like jig streamer method. It can actually be used, I use it to throw a regular floating 3 weight line. So you can use the Euro nymphing line for other things if you wanted to kind of multitask your rod. Just the same as you can do a lot of these rods, but there will be limits. Okay, so Euro nymphing, good. Now we'll talk about the last one here, and this is, again, a fairly unique use case, but it is a very popular one, and that would be Spey or switch rods. And so in this case, we've got an Orvis. This is a mission rod. And so if you are after salmon and steelhead, and if you're in that or want to be, chances are you're going to have to go upgrade or expand your arsenal to something that's more conducive to that type of casting. So as you'll notice, we've essentially got 2.5 handles. So it's basically a 2-handed rod, and the casting motion is a lot different, and the lines that you use are a lot different. So if you wanted to use go use a Spey rod in a scenario where you're catching salmon and steelhead using Spey techniques, you're not going to do that with your 9-foot 5 weight. So this again is another very specific, functionally driven reason for you to expand your rod arsenal to different types of rods. So to summarize, your 9-foot 5 weight is great. Keep it. Worst case, even if you had to upgrade to a different 9'5" weight that you wanted to do something different with, faster, slower, whatever, you've got a good backup. If you start to want to advance out into other types of fly fishing, such as stillwater, salmon and steelhead, saltwater, Euro nymphing, dry fly fishing, very specific things, then you've got this whole slew of different rod types to choose from. We're not pushing any one brand in particular. We just want to educate people on what would be good. We'll list some of these rod types below. If you have any questions, check them out. Again, look us up at flyfishfood.com, and don't forget to check out our school community, school.com. Search us up, Fly Fish Food, and you'll find all that free content. Anyway, thanks for listening. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and stay tuned for more videos.